guest for you now, folks. It's Paul Morgan Summers, and Paul has been seeking since he was a child, and he's going to tell us a lot about that story now. It's a really interesting thing. I'm sure he'll succumb. Paul, how are you? I bet you haven't had an introduction
Hello, John,
like
I'm
that
fine,
before,
thank
have
you. Yeah.
But it's fascinating that from an early age, you were sort of seeking something or looking for something. Even in sport, you were a great sportsman as well.
Yeah, but everybody's like that. Every kid is seeking something, name and fame, to be a pop musician, to be a sporting person, to be a doctor, to be a vet. You know, all my friends, well, most of my friends had dreams or to be this or that, from what I can remember. So I just wanted to be a football player. It was quite clear. I wanted to play football as much as I could and play professionally. And so that was my focus. And I suppose there was a little flavour inside that desire to be a football player. Within that, there was a desire. I was always interested in getting fitter, how far I could push myself. So I think there was two flavours. There was an interest in how fit I could make myself, how fast could I make my brain faster, my legs faster in relationship to playing football. So yeah, that was my total really interest. School was a distraction. Lessons were a distraction.
Was there an emptiness in sports for you?
It was fun. I just loved, although it sounds crazy, I loved running around a green field, chasing a round ball.
But what I suppose I mean, like, there's an emptiness in achieving a goal, scoring a goal, winning a match, and it goes on and on and on infinitum.
I think I was still a youngster. I was still full of excitement and hope and desire. I hadn't had. This was how I was sort of 15, 16. So I hadn't had any serious injuries or any serious setbacks to make me question. Everything was going ahead quite nicely, thank you. I was getting stronger, I was improving, I was being noticed, I was playing well. So I wasn't really focused. I can't remember, it's quite a while ago and my memory isn't the greatest. I can't remember being overly concerned about anything or fearful of anything. I certainly can't remember any sense of referencing anything as feeling a bit empty or anything like that.
So you're interested in sports and you're going to play for Wales and all this, the usual thing that goes on. For me it was Manchester United, and yeah.
I was a Man United fan as well.
I was going to be midfielder, forward, goals. I had it all sorted. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to be in the midfield because then I could have touched the ball
clever,
more often.
Yeah. Roy Keane fan, so.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
very much so.
What happened? What experiences happened? What happened to you when you were younger? Did it come looking for you, or did you go looking for these experiences? What gravitated you towards?
Yeah, so they came out of the blue. I had no framework for them conceptually or experientially in my body. They were, at the time they were at times very scary, confusing, and also energetically very demanding on my body, because they seem to be pushing my system to its limits. I was quite used to pushing my system to its limits, So although those sensations were slightly different, I still had the sense that, gosh, this is the limit within my body. Something at this point could give, like a muscle would give, or a nerve would give, something would give. But then whenever it got to that sort of point, it seemed to have its own knowledge in a way, in a sense the intensity of the experience just went. It didn't continue. It just
Can you describe
depleted.
that intensity?
You've got me talking about stuff I don't really
That's
talk
why I'm
about.
asking you, Paul.
So there were visual experiences, energetic experiences. There was the experiences of wonderful perfumes for months, which in some ways are the perfume experiences have stayed. Their flavors have stayed in my body a lot longer than a lot of the other like energetic intense experiences, which were like fireworks, I suppose. They seem to come, do what they did and go again. This is over a period of about 18 months in total. My body just, one day I was just training football and I just had a feeling to go and sit. Which sometimes you do in football. It wasn't so unusual. Have a breather, have a break. But this was like quite a strong sense. And as soon as I sat, things began to change, really. My whole sense of what was the norm, the sense that I was a center located in my body. My body was my sort of circumference, my edges, and connecting with a football, or my feet connecting to the ground. All that began to be questioned and changed because the experiences were indicating that there was something else. There was another possibility. So over that period of months, every time I sat, there were different experiences. But the thread running through them was that my fixed location, my bodily sense was not as fixed as I thought it was not as solid as I thought it was actually transient. It could be that, or it could be this. To a point that for quite a long time, the body then, instead of there being a sense of a center within the body was literally in the center of a wider circumference, a wider edge of consciousness, of a sense of self, of a subject, of a me, basically. The body was inside me, not me inside the body, which was, weird at the time. And then it became aware that there was like a luminosity in everything I was sensing, in the football, in the grass, in the goalposts, in mum and dad walking into the room, my bed, my pillow, the space between things. It seemed to be filled with this, I can't think of another word, this luminosity. But there was still a sense of a subject, a me, experiencing this. Bloody hell, everything's made out of the same stuff. And that the football is literally the same as my mum. that the stuff and my hand and my foot connecting to the football was all made out of the same luminosity. And then you have to be really careful with my words, because I'm trying to put into language now something that I've never been able to. It was like that luminosity was itself luminous. There was nothing experiencing that luminosity. That was the intrinsic nature of a football, of my mum, of my foot, of my body. It was all made of the same stuff. And that I called it an ocean, because I grew up by the sea and I always loved the sea, and so I had no word for this luminosity. I just called it in my head the ocean. And literally the ocean was all that there is, appearing to be whatever. And that the ocean literally is all there is. And there's nothing, no separate something that was ever separate from that. Other than that, there was no separate something ever born, ever began.
Paul, what age were you when this happened?
I think that I must have been about 17.
So
16, late 17. I can't remember, because I went to play.
Were you able to handle it? How did you cope with it? Was it relatively easy, or did you lose your mind, or did you get help with the whole thing? How did you make sense of it all?
Well, no, it was all, there was nothing. I didn't have words really. I didn't know how to verbalize it or process it. It just happened. They were, it was like being hit by waves. Every time I sat, there was boof, fireworks. So I didn't speak to my mum or dad or anything, because what could I say? But what kept like the fear and the uncertainty and what's going on, so like feelings, in balance or at bay, really, was a sense of wonderment. There was such a wonderment with what was being illuminated. I think that, like, if you had a weighing scale, that wonderment somehow outweighed all this angst and fear and concern that, perhaps the body will die, or perhaps something's going to go really skew with you, and I will go mad. It was a sort of wonderment, and I know this sounds, people don't like me using the word, but it's almost like this was falling in love with this luminosity, this intrinsic isness that wasn't in relationship to anything other than itself, as it were, and that it was playing, as it were. It was completely and utterly free, and that was that wonderment. There was such a buzz to that. It counteracted all the personal concerns, I think. It must have, otherwise I would have run for help, I think.
Do you think karmically you're ready for this, or why you?
Well, I don't see, it didn't happen to, there is nothing but the ocean, so it didn't happen. Nothing happens to a something. It's just the ocean playing. Be careful of some of my words. John will ask a question, and my response will be that question doesn't make any sense whatsoever. That's my initial response. But I've learned through politeness, and just because it's fun.
You've told me now.
To put that into some sort of
Thank you.
There's some sort of context to give a response. No, it's not. No, because John is using a tool, as it were, which is
Yeah.
called language. Called, it's a relational tool, trying to talk about something which has no relationship.
But so Paul fell away, yeah? Or did you fall away permanently as such then? Or did you...
No, there wasn't. That's the
Yeah.
paradox again. Or at least conceptually, it's a paradox. There is nothing to fall away.
But previous to this non-event, there was.
There was just an ocean wanting to be a football player, a personal, successful football player. But there is no thing, no separate something doing that.
But do you think awakening as such, or enlightenment, is the booby prize? That there's no such thing? Or...
If because our normal mechanism is to want something. So from that, in that context, this is an utter disappointment. In that, you left, as you say, like the ticket that has nothing to it. The paradox is there is no separate something to find, because there's no separate something that can be a finder.
Yet all this happens.
That it just arises from what I've come to call this, within the five senses and the brain and the body, an edge protocol.
An edge protocol.
It's a utility. Yeah, it's like a pattern, a process. You could say it's an evolutionary process in the need to, the overriding movement of any pattern is to replicate, is to survive, to replicate itself. So to do that, it needs to move. And in that movement, it has one commandment, basically: don't die. When you move, don't die. So that basic pattern is at the root of all movement, no matter how sophisticated we clothe it. That pattern to move towards, in a very simplistic way, to move towards food, or away if I am food, is replicated in much more sophisticated ways in all the movements in the character. It's always looking for an edge. It's always looking for an edge to enable it to know more, to survive, to be safer, to be better. The list goes on. To be more spiritual, to be a better lover, to be a better business person, to be more peaceful, to be a singer. It's always in a constant movement. It's very much a utility. The five senses are a utility protocol, an edge protocol, which then became more sophisticated with the sophistication of the brain, basically. And when the brain could create another edge called a subjective edge, then that was like rocket fuel for the human, in that it was able to stand back from its stimulus response map, as it were, and overlay other possibilities, other movements. Do I just run away from a lion, or can I climb a tree? Which is the better? So it's began to overlay other possibilities to predict what the best movement will be for its survival. Because it didn't have the luxury to contemplate what is. It had to move. Otherwise it would be food. And it didn't need the movement to be perfect. It just needed the movement to be good enough to survive. It's like if I had to kick the ball into the back of a net, I just had to get any way possible. I'd use any part of my legal part of my body to get that ball into the net. I didn't have to kick it perfectly, and it went into the top right hand corner. Although that was fun, I just had to get the ball into the net. It didn't need to be done perfectly, I just needed to achieve that. A bit like when you use a knife in the kitchen, it doesn't have to be perfectly sharp, it just has to be good enough to cut your tomato, to cut your loaf. And our system is like that, it has to be just good enough to move without dying.
So that reminds me a bit of what the ego might be.
Well, that movement, that protocol is, in a sense, way before the ego came about.
Okay.
In the sense that we perhaps use that word today. The ego, from my perspective, obviously we all use words differently. From the way I think of that word was that it's let's go back a couple of steps. So we have that need to move towards food or away if I am food. That's the five senses we're dealing with, again, way before the brain developed language. And so to predict which movement was good enough, the system develops simplistic maps, as it were. The edges which seemed to have more significance to its survival, it needed to retain those edges into some sort of map. It needed to link them, to be able to map them. So we developed this relationship, this edge protocol. We developed two-ness, as it were, as a utility protocol, not as the truth, just as a utility protocol. And to hold that map together, the system predicted, because it is like a predictive mechanism of how to move, predicted that there must be a separate center to these edges. There must be a separate center to, like, an apple, a lion, a tree, and this body. So that's where the original birth of, you could say, fake news.
Oh, I remember that now. I remember you saying that, actually. Fake news.
Yeah. So the original fake news in life is that there is a separate center to an apple, to a tree, to a football, to a mum, to a dad, to a me, to a you, to an us, to a them, and the list goes on and on and on. Whereas a separate center has never been known. All has ever been known are the relationship, in that apparent gap between two things. That's where knowledge arises. We know something in comparison with a something else. We know one edge in comparison to a different edge. But the system predicted that they have a center, a something. And those somethings that had most significance, including that subjective edge, we gave them a center. So in the context of, say, this conversation, the subject has a center called me, which is the energetic fake news of the simplicity of this. And the ego is a response to that fake news. It's a response to cope with that fake news. It's a response to deal with that fake news. In a way, it's a symptom. It's not causative. It's just the physiological response to the fear and uneasiness of the sense of being
and we'd
separate.
normally take the
something.
ego to be causative. I mean, everything is blamed on the ego as such, and you're saying quite the contrary.
No, it's a response to that fake news, to that energetic sense that there is a center, which came, that energetic sense was way before language began.
through suffering, through that symptom gets quite sick of itself, and it get for here the only words I can put on it is it can get diseased, and it can actually, that symptom can wreak havoc. I mean, we can see it all over the world.
Well, but possibly, John, again, it's not a symptom. Perhaps it's the design of that utility protocol, that edge protocol. It's designed, that evolutionary survival protocol is to keep you moving, to replicate. So what it doesn't want is for John to be a happy, blissed out chappie sat under a tree, contemplating his navel for months at a time, having a wonderful orgasm, because he'll become food for another edge, which is dissatisfied, which is moving, which is hungry. So it wouldn't have had a survival advantage.
The body's natural setup is to survive. And then what you're saying is there's a systematic response to that body's survival.
Yeah, the design of that utility protocol, that edge protocol to survive, is designed to keep Paul, to keep John, to keep the organism in a level of imbalance. It's a bit like walking. The system has to keep itself in a degree of imbalance to allow walking to happen. If there's too much balance, the body won't move. If there's too much imbalance, the body will fall over, which becomes a threat to its survival. So it's learnt to maintain just enough, ideally, just enough dissatisfaction or imbalance, however you want to word it, to make sure the organism moves into the next thing, what's next. Because in the movement to what's next, with the promise that might be the answer, or it might remove this sense of dissatisfaction, has proved to be, with regard to the replication of those patterns, advantageous.
So what happens for Paul? What's the difference between Jimmy, whose systematic leanings are working quite well, and there's a symptom that's working there? And what's the difference between him and you? Is that still happening for you, or what?
The movement,
locus,
that utility, that edge protocol functions
what about
exactly
the locus
the same.
of control, the actual center?
But the energetic sense of that prediction that there must be a center is like the prediction that there must be a separate something called an apple, or a tree, or time, or space. Language will go so far now. It's like all those edges sing their edgelessness, their absence, as not being what they appeared to be. It's a bit like if we were sat by the ocean having our coffee, John, and we saw thousands of waves on this ocean. Are there waves, or is there just water? Could you say the waves are causing the water?
The waves would be sort of like a verb.
There's just water. So there's just ocean appearing as a pole, moving, or as a tree, or as time, or space, or birth, or death, or waking, or dreaming, or sleeping, or a thought, or a feeling. It's the same isness appearing as all those crazy things.
How does it feel for you if you weren't using words to describe it?
Well, there's no feeling and there's no knowledge because those things are not needed. Both those things are relational. Again, knowledge is the relationship between two edges, but the paradox here in this sort of drunken conversation is that this intrinsic isness has no relationship
Okay.
to another edge. There's no other. So there's no time, there's no space for it to be in a relationship with, and yet it can appear to be a football. Time, space, John, Paul. But there's only water. There was no separate something called a wave that was ever born. It was just water. Whatever word you want to give this.
And you did mention sort of that it didn't start. It's hard to fathom that this never began, that the ocean never began.
It can't be, because it can't be measured, it can't be knowledged in the way that this edge protocol functions, the way the five senses in the brain and language, which is born out of movement, is just an enhancement of movement, really. It's, again, this is designed, the five senses, the brain, language is designed for a different purpose. It's designed for replication, don't die. It's designed for simplicity. It's designed for reproducibility, that the maps can be replicated very quickly and with language can then be shared. So we have in a sense, our physiological evolution, which then grows into our shared cultural evolution. So those edges which had most significance to our physiology become things through this predictive mechanism of a center. And those things which had most significance we share, and they tend to then to be the most significant ones become beliefs, and shared beliefs become self-supporting. And in those hierarchy of beliefs, the ones which had most importance again became our cultural, social truths. So the same pattern in a way is being replicated, whether you're talking simply how the five senses work, or how the way we culturally process the information in an effort to predict the best way to move.
That survival instinct, maybe apparent survival instinct, is running amok for a lot of people. So a lot of people, they really are in despair because the head is taken over and they haven't heard of any relief from that, you could say, you know. A lot of the time people are driven towards seeking a way out. What would you say to those people that are looking for enlightenment, looking for a way out, that are seekers, that are reaching the end of the path, that are totally in despair, and they say, what am I doing on this crazy path I'm on? How did you see the ocean? What would you say to these people?
Again, there's just ocean. There's no sense that there are separate somethings called people. There's no gap for there to be a subject, a separate something subject, and a separate something object. So we're within the context of a conversation with in a funny old way, you could say we were both walking along. There's this wave called John, and there's this another wave called Paul. And John says to Paul, "Hello, mate. I'm feeling a bit rough today. I'm really thirsty. I need to find water." And there's this wave called Paul saying, "Oh, you've already got it." But John says, no, this isn't it. I know this. I know this. This is just an apple. This is just a body. These are just thoughts. These are just sensations. These are just waves. I'm just a wave.
So how does the wave just become the ocean? I'm being a devil's advocate here a lot of the time.
Was there ever a separate something called a wave born? Or was there only timelessly just ever water?
Trying to describe life here is impossible. You know,
Well, nobody can describe it.
is it a bit like trying to describe electricity in a way?
Well, the electric is more like I use it. That electricity is the knowledge, is the utility protocol, the edge protocol. That's how knowledge, time, and space arises. It's like if you get a battery, where's the electricity? Well, the electricity isn't in the positive pole. It isn't in the negative pole. It isn't in the space between. But you put those edges together, and suddenly you got the Big Bang. You've got time and space. You've got knowledge. But it's not located in anything specific. There's no knowledge located specific. There's no life specifically located in John. The life, the knowledge only comes when the edge called John comes in relationship to another edge called the world, the environment. That's how the knowledge John arises and the knowledge of all else arises, in that apparent gap between two things. And what we're drunkenly talking about, the intrinsic isness, has no edges, is non-relational. So it has no knowledge. It has no need of that movement called knowledge. It has no need of a Big Bang. So that movement called knowledge, in a way, is the one thing that knowledge can't knowledge, is its own absence, is the gaplessness inherent and intrinsic in its very movement, in its very appearance.
So it's always stumbling forward, kind of.
Yes, it's designed to stumble forward.
Paul, you went into a monastery, talk about being still. I meant to ask you that. It just came into my mind there. Why did you go to the monastery and what happened there?
So the idea of being a professional football player didn't have any meaning for my character then. Still loved playing football, but that wonderment that I spoke about, that's like falling in love with this ocean, just set it off on a course. Just went, oh, I wonder if anybody else, because it's so bloody obvious, that. And I found and I contacted them and said, oh, can I come? And you seem to be chatting about or talking this book. I think the book was on the Upanishads. I'd gone to London, that's it. I'd gone to London and looked around bookshops to see if there was anybody talking about this luminosity, this ocean. And I found this book and I went there and spoke. It happened to be a monastery. And the guy, the abbot in charge, invited me, said, oh, so something very naturally has happened to you. It'd be good for you to come and stay here. And I said, oh, great. So I went there and it was just so much fun being there. And looking back, it exposed me to, because it was like, it wasn't like a religious monastic setup. It was like trying to bring together world religions. Back then it was like behind closed doors, really, to talk with each other, to find common ground and so forth. So I felt to me like I traveled the world really just by being in that building, because everybody came from Asian religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, from the Vatican, the Catholic Church, the Church of England, all talking their stories really. they're maps. And it was there I realised really, how powerful this Edge protocol is in putting the attention onto maps. And we fight over our maps of the underlying landscape, as it were, while missing the love affair of the landscape. That's all very poetically put, but that's what it felt like.
And did you meditate a lot in the monastery, or did you read books or get information?
No, I've never been a book reader. I find it difficult, but I sit, and I could sit for days.
You'd sit for days, literally days.
I could sit for
and
ages.
Would you be there? What would happen? Did you go into a samadhi, or?
There was just wonderment. This ocean could appear to be a tree. Could appear to be these fingers. A thought. A sensation. And but basically the wonderment that no thing has ever been born. It's the only song. It's the only song in this universe. It's the one verse.
When the seeing is happening there must be a center or something. There must be a mental commentary or what? Who was seeing?
But with regard to this there's no mental commentary at all with regard to this luminosity. There's just mental commentary with regard to edges to living life, the patterns and the preferences that are in my character from my tribe, as it were, my family's background and so forth, that are being replicated within my character. It's all very magically simple.
But you're describing quite an astounding state of being, really, to be too simple. It could be that simple.
What do you mean by astounding?
It seems like you're astounded by appearances, and it's a bit like you're trying to but I heard you kind of say it's a bit like nothing was seeing something, and there was a falling into that seeing. But that's quite astounding, hearing that someone say that.
That's the description of that moment, as it were. You have to be really careful of words, because I often say, we're just two drunks now having a conversation about a party that we didn't attend and trying to describe it in our inebriated.
I've never heard it put that way.
We're drunk on time and space.
That way before.
But it's true, because nothing happened in the sense of one thing falling into another thing, because there was never two things in that sense.
There was only one thing.
So it's only this, and this includes that edge called time. What we're talking about, it might sound I'm talking about something which happened in the past, but I'm describing this, which is timeless, which has no reference to the past or the future.
Is there an energy? Can it be transmitted, or is there an energy to people who have seen through the person? Or
there's an energy. There can often be, again, there's no rules, but I've often seen there can be an energetic sort of release in the body, in the sense that the character will just cry or laugh. They'll never create a sentence. They'll never try to language this. It'll always just be like an energetic of laughter, swearing, or tears. And again, thoughts, again, because they're born out of time and space, are late to the party. thoughts come way after and then try to describe or put into relationship what wasn't relational, which wasn't a happening in time and space.
Has this taken a toll on you, Paul, on your body or your way of life?
Well, it changed. Yeah, I could have been a professional
You could have
football
played
player. I could have had
with
name and
Manchester
fame
United.
and money and women and lots of money. So yeah, it's buggered up that possibility.
But energetically, would things, how are you now? Like health wise?
Oh, good. Speaking to people over sort of like quite a few years now. There's no rules to this. I've seen times when there's hardly a ripple occurs within the character, that even their wife or husband wouldn't even notice. And the other extreme, the pattern to replicate called the body will not replicate anymore. It's like the wind goes out of the sail, as it were. And that pattern we call the body will not maintain that pattern. In other words, it'll just die.
Have you any fear of death?
Again, I can try to answer the question, but the question is, was there ever a separate something ever born?
As I say, there's no other way to ask it, but the body will eventually go.
In that sense, death, one hand you're holding life and one hand you're holding death, always. Without death, you can't have life.
So
in a poetic way, death is already your best friend.
have
He never leaves you.
we got it the wrong way around, Paul, about life, birth and death? To lose our sense of self, to lose the body, is nirvana, freedom. There's not a finality to that. I mean, there's always a rebirth.
Because there never was a beginning to it. Again, all these things, all these sort of edges drop away. They don't have any meaning. There's nothing. There's no fatality to anything.
Is life pointless?
Life is the only English words that has the flavour is life is freedom. And freedom is free to have a point. It can be free to be whatever. Yeah. So it can be points. Yeah, it can have a point. And yet, what is that point? Really? That edge we call point? It's nothing other than
so
the
everything
ocean.
is allowed. Everything is allowed.
Well, there's no, even that doesn't get off the ground because there is no separate something to be allowed or disallowed. There's no gap in this love, in this existence.
So if there's no gap, there isn't even freedom.
In the way that people normally, there isn't anything. Because we can't use that word unless we reference it to the opposite in a way or to something else. So in a way, words can be used which are accurate, but that's not the way it is.
And that's it.
And that's it. It can't capture this. It's like there is no separate something. There's no separate someone. Well, those words are accurate, but it's more simple than that. That those words don't actually hold this, but as close as words can get.
So there's actually nothing you can say really about nothing.
No, nothing at all. Absolutely nothing. And there's nothing that needs to be said. And whatever we say is singing it. So we could literally be talking
Yeah.
about football or coffee, and that's it. Talking about, there's no something which is non-duality. There's no something which is duality. There's no something which is a not me or no something which is a me. Just get into a drunken conversation which just goes in round in a loop.
Do you ever get tired of talking about this?
It's like what I said earlier about time is just another edge. So that means this conversation, talking about this, is is immaculate, is brand new. It has no previous to it. Honest, Gov, I've got no previous. Yeah, it's immaculate.
That's a bit like you reminded me there. The mind
in,
can be good cop, bad cop. It can be the thief and the policeman. Like yeah.
oh, constantly. It's constantly in that neurotic duality. Really, that's because that's how it functions. And it's it's not only a jungle out there; it's also a jungle in there. Because it's one, there's no in and out. Again, these are just utility edges. They're designed to replicate, to survive.
Has a teacher ever kind of helped you along the way, do you think, or helped anyone?
Because again, there are no teachers and there are no students. So there is no, like the wave called John that wants to be more wet or find his wetness can't be helped because he already is what is being looked for. It's already the case. So nobody can help a John wave or a Paul wave to become wet.
So we need to become helpless.
So, well, no, it's again that's just another shenanigan. Of like anything but this.
Yeah.
Looking for something else because what this isn't good enough.
There must be something else, and
yes, which is the design of that protocol. And so anything that's read or heard is very much with language, is very much a two-edged sword, really. Probably creates as much clarity as confusion, as much creation as destruction.
What about the neti approach? What do you think of that? It's quite popular in a way. Take the ego out by the root.
Well, if the character wants to, the design of the character's got to keep moving, as far as I'm concerned, because I prefer less violence. This is my character to more violence. For some characters, that seems to encourage less violence within their characters towards themselves, towards
It's interesting.
Others, as it were.
I never heard that before. So you think it's like violence, the neti approach?
I'm sorry to tell you this, but every movement is violent. You, in a sense, the fake news, the birth of that fake news was born out of a lie. So it was born out of a kind of violence. So the very nature of, careful of my words, the very nature of that fake news is to be violent. It's just a question of degree. You cannot create without destroying. You cannot move in time without killing time.
The nitty approach would be to drop what's fake and be in your true nature. How's that violent? I mean, ultimately it isn't violent, but
what happens if there's no gap between the edge called fake and the edge called real or true or whatever?
well, that leads me to the question, is there any difference between a Buddha and a bank robber?
Again, depends on how the context of your question.
As in the two polar opposites?
A bank robber.
As in someone being enlightened and not enlightened, there's no difference ultimately?
So if I have one wave here, which is a little wave, a nice smooth wave, and another wave over here, which is a bigger, more wave, is there any difference in the wetnesses, in the wetness of those two waves? So yes, there is a difference. No, there isn't a difference. The answer is yes and no.
Because you're coming from the fact of the wetness, the ocean, as such.
From the only thing that's in town. It's the only show in town.
So the violent wave is just an appearance along with the surfer's wave.
The smooth wave and the violent wave and.
Paul, why do you do talks and things? We're coming to the end of the show, but you do talks and things still, yeah? I remember seeing you in Dublin once.
Because I get asked, and I still have this one. My character has this wonderment, this love affair. So if you press it, that's what comes out. Basically, it's the only thing that comes out.
I just love to share this message. Is it a message or just a fact? Or
well, it's just singing. It's singing a song, and it's not. There's no sense of sharing it even. There's no gap for there to be a sharing. It's more simple than all. You could dress them up and in that sort of drunken way, and we could have good fun with those stories. But it's not like that. But we could certainly go to a party and dress up as those characters. Which is what we do. That's part of the dance and part of the play.
So there's no message even.
But there's no mover to have a message.
That's it. Yeah.
So it's just a paradoxical conversation, really. That's singing. That there's no gap. There's no gap between the words and the silence. There's no gap between the speaker and the listener. That the silence and the words are not two. That the speaker and the listener are not two. And that's it.
That's all,
that's
folks.
all, folks.
That's the whole secret of the universe delivered there, right there.
The song of the universe.
I'm laughing about it as such. There's here, it feels like it's really, there's some sort of knowing in it,
There is I call it the underbelly to all these sort of conversations. Is that they can be highly disruptive to the to that edge protocol, to that utility, to that identity protocol. And that's, you know, in one sense, again, for my character, is not okay. Because it can be a, you know, to put it mildly, a huge pain in the arse. To have this itch in the body. It's like the genie's out of the bottle and it's mischievous, it's disruptive, and it can't be put back in the bottle. It's a bastard. It can't be put back in the bottle. And it can be hugely disruptive for that identity, for that character.
So don't mind the gap. You see a sign that says mind the gap. So don't mind the gap, folks. No gap.
No gap. But can appear to be a gap.
Paul, I really enjoyed talking to you, and you know, I was thank you. You know, and I'd like to mention, if somebody wants to get in contact with you, they can reach you at this email. Is that correct? It's called onefreedom.song@gmail.com. Okay, I'll put it in the description below.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Paul.
John.
And if anybody wants to donate to the podcast, please do, and subscribe to keep us going. Paul, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and keep singing that song. Because it's fascinating.
Some people say more, and other people just slap you.
Yeah. What to say?
Yes.
And it's, as they say, that's all, folks.
Okay.
That's all, folks.
That's all, folks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.